truth, freedom, and justice. As an expected consequence of the whole Constitution, Commissioner Rene Sarmiento even suggested that it be deleted from the preamble.
People were very, very conscious about the need for justice and peace. And there were people who say, well, those are extraneous words, but the majority, greater majority of the commission said, let's put it there to reflect our sentiment about what should be the framework for our country. The Constitution is the basic law. So those went in there. And then we said, how do we implement these things? And that's how many of the new provisions of the constitutions were born. I think the first definition that people had in mind was armed conflict, that we must address the issue that result in armed conflict, because that's the one thing that's one of the main reasons that have set us back. I think the intent was very clear, that we must address these problems more by social justice and economic growth than exercising any military option. I don't think those work.
Peace was seen as an outcome of certain structures. Peace was a result of having people participate in their economic endeavors. In other words, in the economic provisions and social justice provision, we have many provisions that are very explicit in terms of providing people opportunities to participate in their own economy. But yes, but we don't have a very explicit provision on peace, except mentioning it as a goal. Commissioner Ascuna said that he at one time proposed a people's army, kind of, and certain alternatives to the armed forces. But these are, of course, ideals. In the same way, at that time, we did propose, I think a group of us proposed federalism, and now it seems like it's something that may have a chance. But what I'm saying is that in the commissioners raised many concepts that are along the way you're thinking, but somehow I think perhaps one of the constraints was that many of us who were more development-oriented were perhaps in the minority. Maybe this may be an oversight, maybe there could have been one, but I think I think many of us saw peace as an outcome of all of these.
If you ask me, I would take it from that substantive approach, contextual approach, comprehensive approach, rather than looking at it merely from a literal or legal perspective, which would look at the lines. Rather, kind of look at the lines, but read beyond the lines, and also look at the provisions which are most relevant in terms of the question, which is, does the Constitution tell us that direction regarding peace by peaceful ways that we should in fact kind of privilege or put priority on? And I would say, from my experience in the commission, that this was the kind of questions we were addressing, albeit it may not have found its place literally, but one has to have a kind of, not just a political will to interpret it, but a political imagination to be able to understand that.
Did the commissioners use the word peace consistently? Consistency and clarity are standards by which lawyers and justices determine the intent of the Constitution. Expressing concern over the problem of insurgency and seeking to uphold police power, peace returned in the Constitution in Section 5, Article 2 as peace and order. The maintenance of peace and order, the protection of life, liberty, and property, and the promotion of the general welfare are essential for the enjoyment of all of the blessings of democracy. It seems benign and self-explanatory, but it reflected a clash of frameworks.
My point is, when peace is linked to peace and order, when the notion of peace is linked to the idea of peace and order, there's actually a struggle for interpretation that's happening. When in fact, for many of us, what we mean by peace is in fact human rights, it's social justice, it's participation. The instrumentalities of the state, particularly through the security sector institutions and through the peace and order councils and through so-called citizens groups that espouse that ideology, is totally alien and opposed to that whole notion of social justice and human rights and participation. But then that's the reality of political life. It's impossible to get everyone to agree on one interpretation, one definition. Ultimately, it will have to be a result of engagement, of organizing, of empowering the people.
Peace and order is a phrase, right? Whenever you have governments, they always use peace and order, and I think the context is different. I think peace and order refers more to police, but I think the context of peace in that phrase is different from the way it was used in the preamble and in many other places in the Constitution, and I think the deliberations of the Commission will show that.
Ople raised a possible conflict with the Bill of Rights. Ed Garcia said it might encourage militarism. Assured by the proponent Ambrosio Padilla that it should not prejudice social justice and basic rights, the provision was passed with 24 in favor and 12 against. All said and done, it would have been best if the 1987 Constitution spelled out in explicit terms the right to peace through peace, just as it did the rights of women, the urban poor, workers, farmers, future generations, and indigenous communities. But then, compared to the post-Marcos agenda of restoring civil and political rights, the women's movement, and environmental consciousness, the discourse on peace in the country was still new. Globally, it was a discourse still in its infancy. It was only in November 1984 when the UN General Assembly approved Resolution 39-11 for the declaration of the right of peoples to peace.
The maintenance of a peaceful life for peoples is the sacred duty of each state, and that the peoples of our planet have a sacred right to peace. State policies should be directed towards the elimination of the threat of war, particularly nuclear war. In naming the right to peace, the UN affirmed its core aims of peaceful settlement of disputes, prohibiting the use of threat in international relations, and the need to cease production of weapons of mass destruction, disarm, and demilitarize.
The right to peace belongs to so-called third-generation rights. Civil and political rights belong to the first generation. Social, economic, and cultural rights are second generation. Third-generation rights question how resources and power are distributed, especially given the nature of the global world order. They include the rights to self-determination, to economic and social development, to a healthy environment, to participate and benefit from the common heritage of mankind, and finally, the right to peace.
Can the newness of the global discourse explain why the Constitution wasn't more explicit? After all, the Philippine peace movement was born only in 1986, alongside the quest to find peaceful solutions to the domestic conflicts and to build a culture of peace. Peace negotiations with the CPP and the MNLF were just begun, and this didn't get very far. Globally, the peaceful end to the Cold War and the new agreements that ushered a new phase in Guatemala, Cambodia, Mozambique, South Africa were still to come.
It was already probably there, but had not reached the same level of discussion at an international level as there is of it now. Does the fact that there is no articulation of a right to peace in the Constitution as such, as compared to labor rights, women's rights, children's rights, indigenous people's rights, civil rights, political rights, just because it's not articulated, does that mean that there is no such right to peace?
Peace as a concept has been defined and made more explicit subsequent years as a result of maybe uh, we have, after having had more time to reflect on EDSA 1 and 2, and the peace process and the conflict in Mindanao, and then also the regional conflict in the different states all over, global conflict. What you call, if we put it in terms of levels, we were at the simple base of 1 and 2, and we're probably in 3 or 4 or 5 stages now in terms of our perception and definition of what peace, or war means, And this is probably why there has been no definition of peace as a concept in terms of the broader concept. I think everybody wanted domestic peace in terms of labor management. You have peace, agrarian reform, and then war in Mindanao. These are, and peace that can be achieved through means like ancestral domain, or the structures that have been seen as mechanisms for keeping peace and reducing inequities and inequalities. So I think the imperatives are there. I think we should, we should not just do it indirectly like we did, indirectly through some social justice provisions. But because of that lack of clarity, administrations, have differing approaches on all-out war.
Aspiring sincerely to the international peace based on justice and order, the Japanese people forever renounce war as a sovereign right of the nation, and the threat or the use of force as means of settling international disputes. In order to accomplish the aim of the preceding paragraph, land, sea, and air forces, as well as other war potential, will never be maintained. The right of belligerency of the state will not be recognized.
The 1987 Constitution doesn't have Japan's famous Article 9 or no war clause. Ideas to demilitarize the country were promptly rejected. But our Constitution does qualify as a peace constitution in other ways than what was embodied in Japan's. The idea, intention, and elements of the right to peace, a comprehensive peace, are found in parts and in whole. It has new and progressive provisions that are not found in older and other constitutions. Among the most controversial issues in the constitutional deliberations were the termination of the U.S. bases, a foreign policy of neutrality, and the inclusion of a nuclear-free clause for the first time in Philippine constitutional history. Despite the House divided, supporters of the ban on nuclear weapons and foreign military bases managed to get these addressed in the Constitution, but not without major compromises. The anti-nuke provision, Section 8, Article 2, reads, "The Philippines, consistent with national interests, adopts and pursues a policy of freedom from nuclear weapons in its territory." Its main author was Rustico de los Reyes. Very good. But to allow for exemptions, as demanded by other commissioners, the qualifier consistent with national interests was added. This to also mean subject to national interest. They were also assured that while nuclear arms and testing were banned, nuclear-capable vessels were not. However, this poses a problem of implementation. The U.S. has always maintained a policy of neither confirming nor denying whether its ships docked on our shores carry nuclear weapons.